through people-oriented economic policies and carefully planned strategic involvements to drive foreign investment into the country.
Is a duty for you and me. If you see something, say something. Nigeria unite against terrorism. This message is brought to you by the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
And you're welcome back. And joining us now in the studio is Mukhtar Sirajo, the President and Chairman of Council, the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Karen.
All right. Let's begin this way. You have an AGM, which is coming in a couple of hours from now. What is the conference all about, or what does it hold for the practice of public relations in Nigeria?
Well, yes, we have a conference with the theme optimizing public relations strategies for national cohesion. In fact, it holds, what it holds goes beyond the profession itself. It holds more for the country. You know, the public relations profession is one that is premised on building relationships and mending them where they crack. And we think with all the hassles that the country has gone through, the electioneering cycle, the frayed nerves, we needed to come together as a people to tell ourselves that now that the election season is over, we need to focus on more fundamental issues of governance and relationship mending. So it is more for the country than for the profession itself.
All right. Now, how has this profession, the practice of public relations, how has it fared in the country, generally speaking, you know, in terms of the practice itself?
How has it fared or failed?
Fared.
Well, we haven't fared, it hasn't fared badly, but I want to say with all sense of honesty that it hasn't fared as beautifully as it should have due to a number of factors, the fundamental of which is the fact that the system as it is has not given due recognition to the role that the profession is supposed to play and deploying it maximally for the benefit of the country. And this is what we are trying to do now, trying to reposition it, trying to reach out to the operators of the system, trying to enlighten or remind them of what they need to do as far as public relations is concerned to ensure that it plays the role that it ought to. It is said better late than never.
All right. Is there a kind of overlapping responsibilities, you know, between the practice of public relations and that of journalism profession? We find out that in so many organizations, you don't get a public relations department. What you have in most cases is a communication department, public affairs department, and what have you. Is there a correlation or an overlapping, you know, in this area? Now, if yes, now how do we now separate the practice of these two professions that have some certain similarities?
That's a very wonderful question. I think part of the mistake that we have been making as a people, as a country, particularly the operators of our system, is in not trying to do what you just asked us to do now, differentiating between the two. Public relations and journalism are partners, but they are not the same. Journalism is just one of the many vehicles that public relations uses to attain its set goals. Journalism is about reporting. Public relations is a lot more deliberate, more calculating in nature. It actually scans environment, analyzes situations, and comes up with measures through which goals can be attained. And like I told you, journalism is just one of the many vehicles that we use to drive the process. It is not just enough for one to be able to speak good English, write well, for them to be assigned the responsibility of managing perception. Managing perception goes beyond that. It requires a proper training in that regard. And that is why perhaps the formulators of the law that actually gave birth to the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations, which is Decree number 16 of 1991, now an Act of Parliament, makes it a criminal offense for anybody to practice public relations by whatever name without appropriate licensing by the institute. And the licensing, that's without being a member of the institute. And you just don't become a member until you are thoroughly trained in the acts, in the nuances, in the intricacies of the public relations industry. And this is part of the things we are actually looking at, appealing to the operators of our system to see the wisdom behind the insertion of such clauses in the law that gave birth to the institute, so that when they come to make such appointments, like you have mentioned, communications, corporate affairs, all of them are just public relations by other names. You look for trained practitioners to fill those slots. And this country is not bereft of such practitioners. In fact, it is overflowing with them. The only thing is that just try to identify them and we are good to go.
While you are looking for best practices with regard to the PR profession in Nigeria, some persons would say that it remains an all-comers affair. The profession seems to be eclectic. It absorbs professionals from all fields, persons from all kinds of backgrounds. How much of a challenge do you have in dealing with persons who are not certified, as it were, to be PR practitioners?
It's a very big challenge, and it is part of what I actually mentioned earlier, that we actually, the system has been finding it difficult, or has not even made any conscious effort to try to sift the wheat from the chaff. You find virtually everybody in there, but like I said, the qualified public relations practitioners are well known. At least we know them, and we're trying to do the best that we can to market them and to let the operators of our system know that it is, like you just said, not an all-comers affair. It is a field that requires you to be thoroughly trained and experienced. Now, we have people who probably been ignorant of the law, who have practiced in court the profession, so to speak, of public relations illegally, as far as the law is concerned. But what we are trying to do is to provide, apart from the advocacy we are carrying on now to enlighten people on the need to really professionalize, is to give a window of opportunity to those who have been practicing without licensing to avail themselves of the opportunity that we give to train them. We have what we call the master class, which has been quite successful. We started it some 2 or so years ago, and it has actually produced quite a number of people who have now become licensed practitioners after having undergone a thorough crash program that the Institute has initiated. Apart from that, we are very soon going to, as part of the advocacy we are undertaking, going to meet with the Attorney General of the Federation, whose responsibility it is, as per the act that gave birth to the Institute, to actually establish a tribunal to try people who are found practicing public relations without going through the due processes. Perhaps he may not be aware, or he has forgotten. We just want to use our visit to remind them that that aspect of the law exists, so that we can begin to fight that anomaly.
Well, some persons would respond and say that some of the clauses you have in some of the laws that were made under the military tended to have created sanctions that would appear to be in the extreme. And that part of what you're doing now, that's to say continuous training or the so-called masterclass, will be more useful. And then to also preach to potential users of PR services to go for the professionals so that they can get the maximum benefits derivable from proper perception management. But I'm just wondering, you're calling on government now, as it were, to enforce the provisions of the law. How much patronage does NIPR or its members receive from government itself to deal with certain critical matters that pertain to perception management at all levels, local, state, and federal?
With all sense of honesty, very little. And the first part of your statement, I want to disagree with that. The formulators of the Act tended to be harsh in terms of the penalty. I think we at the moment have a committee of legal experts in the Institute who are working towards seeing that the law is actually amended to make the penalties harsher than they are. We believe they are not harsh enough. A situation in which you are fined, you know, in those days, of course, when the value of our currency was something to write home about, you are fined 1,000 naira or 2,000 naira or a 6-month imprisonment or both. I think that is not punishment enough in the present context of our existence. But I like what you just said about patronage. We have been crying our voices hoarse for the system. Of course, you know, they say if you're pointing a finger at people, 3 or 4 others are pointing back at you. That is not to say we are not without blemish too. We accept our responsibility. Perhaps we haven't done enough, and this is why we are actually doubling or tripling or quadrupling our efforts now and measures to ensure that we take the fight out there. I would cite you an example. Even our leaders, governments, do not actually come clean. This is an act. Like I tell people, NIPR is not an organization, it's not a trade union, you don't go to the Corporate Affairs Commission to look for its certificate of incorporation. No, it was chartered. It was a decree which is now an act of parliament. So it is part of, it is a law of Nigeria. Now it behoves on the governments at all levels to ensure that the provisions of that law are complied with. But does the government come clean in that respect? I unfortunately answer no. But then this is the essence of the advocacy we are actually continuing to conduct with a view to engaging the government to see that we do the right thing. If you take a look at our political parties and even our political leaders, most of our major political parties, even in crafting their messages, they go out of the shores of the country to hire experts, to hire experts in court to come and craft messages for the consumption of the Nigerian public. And there is a danger in that. I've always argued that it is very, very dangerous because these people that you call into this country don't know the nuances of this country, they don't know our fault lines, they don't know what messages are likely to offend the sensibilities of this or that person. But if you engaged professionals from here, all politics, they say, is local.
There is a connection between what you have just said and what you alluded to in your opening remarks, which is that the profession has not fared well in the country in terms of its practice. Didn't that create, you know, an avenue for quacks or the hiring of foreigners to come and do your job? Whom are you blaming for that?
I blame all of us. And like I said, it is not a blame game. But then you don't continue to blame the other person without actually doing a soul search in yourself. We, I believe, should have done more before now. But I want to assure you, we're doing quite a lot right now to ensure that we reverse that ugly trend. And as I'm talking to you right now, we are prosecuting. We have upped the intelligence ante, the intelligence gathering ante of the Institute, and we have caught some people parading themselves as officials of the NIPR, conducting fake trainings, awarding fake certificates. As we talk to you now, we are in court with them. They are being prosecuted, and I think we have a date for June.
All right, Mukhtar Sirajo, President and Chairman of Council of the Nigerian Institute of Public Relations, would like to thank you for being with us and to wish you the very best, but just to also indicate that, you know, you have a mountain to climb. Public relations and allied practices, including media relations, publicity, the role of publicists, and to an extent, the media adjunct of it, which is also journalism that you were trying to explain. But we wish you the very best, and thank you for being with us on Good Morning Nigeria today.
Thank you so much.
All right, it's Good Morning Nigeria, still on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We're taking a short break now. When we return, we'll be dealing with world press freedom.
Why don't you people sell imported materials here? As beautiful as the shop is.
See, buying foreign goods does not help our economy. Neither does it boost local production. And the good thing is Nigerian-made products are high quality. And to make Nigeria great again, that is why I only sell made in Nigeria products. Because change begins with me.
I'm convinced. Change begins with me too. Change begins with me.
This message is brought to you by the National Orientation Agency in conjunction with the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture.
All right, now to set the stage for our next conversation this morning, here is Abdulmalik Adio with a background report.
It is the fourth estate of the realm, with an Achillean task of holding the other three arms of government, the executive, legislature, and the judiciary accountable. But then, it must also have to be professional in carrying out this responsibility. And so, it is the case of the hunter. With threats of violence on the rise, journalists strive to safeguard their profession, and the press freedom has never been more critical to the health of democracy. Being the most accepted form of governance, democracy needs the media to thrive, as it is people-oriented, and the freedom to express opinion is the bedrock. The press, which serves as a vehicle to carry such opinions from both the led and the leaders, experts say, needs to be protected and allowed to function without hindrance. However, this is increasingly becoming a challenge as journalists and journalism continues to be stifled, as indicated in the report measuring the degree of freedom that journalists and news organizations enjoy in more than 180 countries in the world. Reporters Without Borders on World Press Freedom Index 2019 ranks Norway first, while Finland came second and Sweden is in the third place in the index of countries in support of press freedom. The index reports that 80 journalists were killed last year across the world, and 60 were held hostage, and a total of 348 journalists were detained for providing news and information. This, experts say, has a significant impact in terms of information sharing and access to information which democracy encourages. The United States of America, described as the country of the First Amendment, also dropped 3 positions from 45th to 48th. Experts say this is significant because America is seen as the beacon of press freedom around the world, and this might have a negative repercussion on the different countries, especially in areas of the enabling fake news, which is mostly used by authoritarian regime around the world. Like the famous saying, power corrupts and absolute power is corrupting. The index also reveals that the Middle East and North Africa are the most dangerous places to be a journalist, tagged the Black Zone with major attributes to the war in the region and authoritarian leaders. Nigeria also dropped further in the ranking from 119 in 2018 to 120 among 180 countries that support press freedom. The Reporters Without Borders bemoaned the incessant harassment and intimidation of journalists by military officers and politicians in Nigeria to some of the causative factors, while journalists are often threatened, subjected to physical violence, and denied access to information by government officials, police, and sometimes the public itself. The index also shows a significant rise for Ethiopia, jumping 40 points high, and Tunisia, jumping 25 points higher than the preceding year's ranking. With the decline in press freedom around the world, experts say the defense of quality journalism and the protection of the state of journalists around the world needs to be prioritized.
All right, Abdul Malik Adil, thank you very much for that backgrounder. We have three guests with us in the studios to discuss this issue in further detail. First, let's welcome Professor Umaru Pate. Of course, he's a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria. Professor Umaru Pate is a former Dean Faculty of Communications at Bara University, where he is now currently the Dean of Postgraduate School of Studies. Professor Pate, pleasure to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you, Kingsley, and good morning.
Also here with us in the studios, we'd like to welcome Malam Garba Shehu. Malam Garba Shehu is the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity. Malam Garba Shehu, former editor and also former President of the Nigerian Guild of Editors. Malam Garba, pleasure to have you with us this morning.
Thanks. Thank you.
Also here with us is the current President of the Nigeria Union of Journalists, Comrade Charles Isiguzo, Comrade Chris, rather, Isiguzo. Pleasure to have you with us on the program this morning.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Okay.
All right, gentlemen.
I hope I got that pronunciation right.
Yeah, you tried.
We always refer to him as Isiguzo.
No, it's not 100%. You got it 95%. Yes, and he happens to be the #1 journalist in the country today. And I would like to begin with you, Isiguzo. Now, press freedom, as we know, it was proclaimed by the UN National Assembly, General Assembly in December 1993, following the recommendation of UNESCO General Assembly. I want us to go back to the origin. What is the root of this day? Among all the professions that we have, why must we observe a day called Press Freedom Day?
Well, thank you very much once again. The analysis we listened to earlier tried to get to the origin of press freedom. Like the United Nations Secretary General did say quite recently, he said that no democracy is complete without access to transparent and reliable information. It is a cornerstone for building fair and impartial institutions, holding leaders accountable and speaking truth to power. This statement by Antonio is very, very remarkable. The media, as you well know, plays a very significant role in entrenching genuine democratic ideals. And that's why this date is specifically set aside to celebrate the fundamental principles of press freedom and, of course, assess the state of press freedom throughout the world, defend the media from attacks on their independence, and, of course, pay tribute to journalists who have lost their lives in the line of duty. And that's why this date, this year, we are celebrating the 26th anniversary, so to speak, concerning this World Press Freedom Day. And as you are very much aware, this year we are having a specific theme, Media for Democracy, Journalism and Elections in Times of Disinformation. Looking at the spread, so to speak, of fake stories, fake news with intention to deceive, to create propaganda, and all that. So that's why the United Nations has deemed it necessary that we must have to look at this critical issue, disinformation, fake news, and its spread. Because oftentimes it is said that journalists are the purveyors, those that disseminate, fake news. But if you look at it critically, you find out that those who are involved in this are not really journalists. And that's why we are looking at it specifically as I speak, since yesterday, this celebration already has started in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, with different presentations going on. Even this morning, we are supposed to be there as Nigerian Union of Journalists, but because we have on our own decided to package it a different way, the way it is peculiar, to Nigeria, by the 6th, we are celebrating our own World Press Freedom Day differently. We are going to be recognizing people who, like we said, paying tribute to people that have paid the price different ways. That's what we are doing. We're looking at journalists that have died in the process, the journalists that have been attacked, harassed, assaulted in the process. Of course, institutions that by their own actions have promoted press freedom. We are looking at all this, and that's why we are not participating in Addis Ababa event.
All right, Chris Isiguzo, thank you very much there for your opening salvo. Now, before we get into the meat of the theme for this year's celebration, against the background of what is happening, and against also the background of the theme for this year's celebration, Professor Omar Opate, the question arises, press freedom for whom and press freedom for what?
Thank you very much, Kingsley. Let me start by congratulating journalists all over the world on the 26th anniversary of the World Press Freedom Day declared by the United Nations in 1993. Of course, press freedom has everything to do with the sustenance of democracy in any part of the world. And you cannot talk about freedom of the people, you cannot talk of freedom or rather democracy without talking about the ability of the people to express themselves, to be able to impart as well as receive information. And information is fundamental in public opinion formation, public opinion change, and generally in the process of governance. Where people are not able to be free to express themselves, then you realize that their talent is not likely to be also expressed. Where press freedom is not available, process of governance may also be inhibited, and you could also have a process of tyranny taking over instead of having concession, instead of having separation of powers, instead of having representation and good governance. Therefore, press freedom is fundamental to the existence of democracy. Press freedom is also important in the survival of the people. And like Amartya Sen once said in his book, if you could remember, Development as Freedom, one of the arguments he put is that freedom is development. That is the basis of his own thesis. And where he says, wherever there is no freedom, look at the kind of quality of life the people of such a nation live. Where there's no freedom, you are likely to find hunger, you are likely to find illiteracy, you are likely to find poverty. And all these are ingredients of bad governance, ingredients of backwardness, and they are all anti-development and anti-progress. Therefore, we could argue conveniently and convincingly that press freedom is a necessity that governance must live with to ensure accountability, to ensure creativity of the people themselves.
All right, let's turn to Malam Garba Shehu and let's bring it closer, to Nigeria. You have been practicing journalism for a very long time, and of course the history of Nigeria is also well known to you. This is a nation many believe has had a checkered political history. We've had a parliamentary system. We've also had a military interregnum at different times, and of course back to democracy this time around. Now, give an assessment of press freedom in Nigeria. Do we really have press freedom in Nigeria? If we do, what nature of freedom are we talking about? Because in the entire process, of getting Nigeria from 1960 to date, we've also had some ugly stories, about the practice of journalism. Some people have paid the price, some people have been detained, some abducted, and what have you.
Well, this country, as you rightly said, has had a press that has been tied in so many ways with the evolution of the country's, constitution and development. It is not an overstatement to say perhaps without an independent press, in those early days, independence for Nigeria would have been delayed. It may have eluded this country. We have had, as we said, a checkered past. It's not been an easy one for the press in the country. But the important thing is that the press in the country has been, if I would use the word, unput-downable. That attempts had in the past been made to put down the press, to suppress it. But nobody had ever succeeded because the press had always had come on top. You asked the question, can we say we have press freedom in the country? And what is the nature of it? I would say that in this country, at the moment as I speak, under the Buhari administration, the mass media in the country enjoy an absolute freedom of expression. In fact, up to a fault. Because at some point you tend to think that it is moving towards licentiousness. Today in this country, there is nothing that you cannot publish. It doesn't happen anywhere. Because all over the world, there are systems of restraint. Much of it by conventional journalism, by organization, self-control mechanism. In situations of dictatorship, there's a strong arm of government. But in the case of this country, we've had no such under this dispensation, and because it is creeping, moving towards licentiousness, I'm saying that the bell is ringing for something to be done. I'm not saying that the government is likely to promulgate laws to do this thing, but when you look around and see what is happening globally, as I speak to you this morning, the British Parliament is continuing with the debate on how to regulate, how to reduce harm by social media. Harm on children, harm on women, harm on minorities in society. They are being careful not to be seen as attacking freedom of expression, which nobody wants to do. I'm saying that there are laws now in Germany and India on WhatsApp that people broadcast on all of these things. If you take away America, everyone is doing something in the world because things are getting out of hand.
All right, Malam Garba Shehu, thank you very much. Let's bring in the NUJ president, Chris Isiguzo. You listen to Malam Garba talk about what, some persons would say that, look, the frontiers of freedom of expression or press freedom are now getting into the wild, transiting into what it refers to as licentiousness. And therefore, there might be need for self-regulation or some other mechanisms borrowing from other jurisdictions. What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much. Usually, when you see an appreciable level of clampdown on the media, is before, during, and after elections. It becomes so pronounced with the activities of political actors who, of course, engage the media in different forms. But looking at the just concluded elections, I think the statistics of journalists that were in one way or the other attacked dropped significantly. Unlike what we used to have in the past. There's no doubt about it. Apparently because we had more engagements with state actors for them to really appreciate the role of the media. All of us want to build a very sane climb. And of course, the state actors are coming from one flank, and of course, the media comes from a different flank, having the same destination. And because we were involved in those engagements, that's why we recorded minimal issues. Now, yes, more looking at the activities of journalists, especially those on the online, of course, and of course those that operate from the social media flank, I agree with him that much as we should have unfettered access, freedom, there must be some sort of regulation so that we don't completely destroy the very fabric, that holds us together as a nation. Is very much in order that one, as journalists, we must also appreciate the fact that we don't enjoy immunity to destroy. We should not be involved in a destructive kind of journalism. We should rather be more involved in developmental kind of journalism. Journalism to build, not journalism to destroy. And that's why it's important that, one, we must regulate ourselves first. When we come to terms with this clear understanding that we need to build the society together, then it now becomes incumbent on us to regulate ourselves. There are times, maybe out of desperation, political actors seem to engage the media. But we, even when they come from that flank, we should bear in mind that no matter what we do, we are still Nigerians. If you go to Europe, you go to America, yes, you might enjoy the highest level of comfort, but those places are not your home. You still come back home. So that's why we must do everything possible to keep the country together, to build the country together, and not to help any set of people to destroy it.
Okay, thank you. Kingsley, I'm just thinking about this issue of the social media, platform, which is being extensively used by not just journalists, but invaders of the profession, if you like, who have unfettered access to the social media platforms that are using to disseminate information, and very critical information for that matter, about issues that concern governance, issues of legislature, issues of general administration of this country. And I'd like to ask Omar Part to look into this aspect of journalism that the country is living with at the moment, because those who make use of the platforms, many of them are not journalists, yet they are touching critical national issues. Some of them are purveying lies, fake news, and what have you, and are prepared to even back it up, So how do we now address this trend? Because as Isiguzo rightly pointed out, we're not seeking for freedom to destroy the nation, but what we have on social platforms are destructive.
Thank you very much. Let me make some comments on what the SAA earlier said about the existence of or the prevalence of press freedom in Nigeria before answering this question. For you to understand the extent and the depth of press freedom in Nigeria, or media freedom rather, let me not just say press freedom, media freedom in general, you need to understand the challenges of the media as at today in this country. And there are about 4 or 5 major challenges. One, the issue of credibility. How credible is the Nigerian media today in this country? 2, the issue of ethics. 3, the issue of funding. And 4, the challenge posed by the social media and our ability to integrate the social media into the current conventional media system. Now, if you look at this and then try to measure the level of press freedom, which you look at maybe the safety enjoyed by journalists in this country, the amount of trust people give to our media, and all the others, you realize that there are 3 or 4 major sources that hinder press freedom in this country. One, political interference from governments at all levels, particularly state governments that control state broadcasting organizations. Many of, or majority of our people depend on broadcast media organizations, and these outlets are tightly controlled to the extent that the quality of information that they give are hardly believed by a lot of our people because of the kind of interferences and the kind of gatekeeping processes and the ability for them to investigate and report independently is suspect. Then secondly, look at the interest, the interference or the influence of corporate world into the quality of the programming on our media organizations. Today, a lot of our programs are either sponsored, paid for, which means the direction and the content are subjected to economic interests rather than social or people's interests. Mm-hmm. And then the issue of issue of capacity. The capacity for investigative journalism that can reveal truth and put governance into accountability is also weak. A lot of studies have been conducted in this country on the extent to which media organizations engage in real documentary production for the broadcast organization and real investigative journalism independently conceived and conducted by media organizations is also weak. So by the time you look at all of this, then you now ask, what quality of information do our people enjoy? Is it the kind of information really produced in our newsrooms based on the judgment of journalists or by some other external forces or some other extraneous factors? Now, let's keep that apart. Let me return to your factors.
Before you return to that, the issues you've raised, some scholars would argue that these are historical matters with the media.
Yes.
For instance, ownership and control, which you described as political interference, yes. Corporate intrusion. You were talking earlier, one of the challenges of financing.
Yes.
So, whether in the advanced or developing world, you also have that influence. Yes. And then the capacity for investigative journalism, yes. There are also restraints. Some persons would therefore argue that these are, what are the issues that you have to deal with and that they have a long history behind them?
How are we handling them? How are we handling the issues? I wouldn't want to go into specific examples. Now, let's go back to the issue of the social media. You see, for you to understand the fact of this information that we are experiencing today, which you describe as fake news, fabricated news, manufactured news, or whatever name you decide to give it, leading to things like hate speech and all of that, which are real serious issues for a country like our own, which is multicultural and diverse. Now, there are some factors that can explain to you why we have high volume, high velocity, but no veracity. Why is it? Number one, the advent of the internet, which has now made it so simple for people to create their own content because of access to the 4G, 3G internet facilities, which makes information to flow so hugely and so cheaply. Number two, you also need to look at the distribution pattern of information on the social media platform. Unlike what you have in the conventional media, there you do not have gatekeeper. It's a gatekeeper-less institution. Anybody can go in, anybody can come out with whatever kind of intention, no matter how mischievous. Then you also need to look at the political economy of online media. Some people go into these things to make money. Some people for mischief. Some people for all sorts of reasons. Today, anybody who is unemployed, he can easily start his own online newspaper without having a single reporter. He is the reporter, he is the editor, he is the publisher, he is the everything. And whatever information he decides to put out, that will be the truth. So you can see a lot of volume, very high speed, but then no fact-checking. So if you look at all of these things, then the computer makes it so easy for you to do things like photoshopping, to manipulate content, and to create all sorts of lies. And because of the credibility of the conventional media we have in this country and some other places, people tend to believe what they read on the social media, either because there is delay in response through the conventional media, either they do not believe what comes out of the conventional media, either the elites have lied so much to the extent that they no longer believe what comes out either from government or from people in big places. You have to do a lot to convince people to believe you. So they easily resort to this, and many of us have become so lazy, mentally lazy, that we do not want to read and challenge ideas that come our way. So anything that comes, we just take it hook, line, and sinker. And because of this, today we have become a one big room for the prevalence of disinformation, which our people believe, to the detriment of our own existence Today you could see how dangerous fake news is fueling ethnic crisis, is fueling religious crisis, is fueling political crisis, peddling lies, and people are believing these things. Because we do not have history to check, we do not have geography to check, our conventional media organizations cannot give us contrary opinions that will challenge these things.
All right, Professor Pate, thank you very much. Madam Garba, back to you. Is good journalism under threat in Nigeria? And if so?
Oh, absolutely so. Absolutely. As Prof said, the easy access that people have now with a handheld telephone, in fact, you don't need a radio set now. Major networks, including the BBC, they are now moving to that. In fact, that is the future of radio now, is on the handset. And the handset takes photography, enables you, to broadcast as in WhatsApp, huge community of your own followers and all of that. So the thing is, as you said, the absence of gatekeeping, that is the most dangerous part of it. The lack of professionalism and the training. In Kaswar Magani last year in Kaduna State, you recall the incident where 50 innocent persons were killed arising from the spread of fake news. And this was confirmed. Christian Association of Nigeria in Kaduna said this incident came from fake news. The Office of National Security Advisor confirmed that it is coming from fake news. So that's where we are now. And the real danger is, as I said earlier on, unless we're able to do this, and unless we're able to persuade people, and how do we persuade them? Again, it goes back to some of the elements that Prof has raised. Because without credibility and the competition, and perhaps this is on account of this that the Buhari administration is opening up the broadcast space to more and more people. This government just issued about 150 new radio licenses all across the country. When there is competition, when there is variety, you deregulate the environment, you cannot suppress the truth. Because Kano City, where he comes from, when you have about 15 radio stations, in Lagos, where you have about 40, they can't all agree to tell lies. So that's the only way to check these things.
Yeah, even for radio, I mean, let me just chip this in while you continue. Some persons would argue that the content of some of the live broadcasts, content is worrisome, particularly the phone-in programs where, you have all kinds of unrestrained allegations being peddled. Just plain insult, in flagrant violation of the broadcasting code.
I said to you, in all honesty, we get worried that the main press now, the mainstream media, generally radio, TV, and the newspapers, they're taking their line from the social media. It's like the tail wagging the dog, which really is you would have thought in the past, they used to say this, or BBC, for instance, that if you had the news on local radio in the country, you waited for its confirmation on BBC. Now the thing would have been that for radio, TV, and newspapers, the mainstream press, to give you the confirmation, that assurance that these are the facts. But I assure you, if you spend a lot of time checking on Facebook and Twitter in the evening before the following morning, you would have made up your minds. You will see what the newspapers will be telling you the following morning in exact words of headlines, how they are cast, and the prominences they give to stories, which is sad for the country.
That's a measure of laziness.
And worrisome, sir. Most of our young people are on this social media.
Exactly.
That's the most worrisome aspect of it. And
That's why
they get people with energy who act and who go into some of these conflicts that we see.
As a matter of fact, I don't envy Malam Garba Sheikh, because sometimes I read him on social media platform responding to certain publications, allegations of fake news, concerning the presidency and what have you. And it takes a brain like him, to actually do that, because there are just a plethora of such allegations. So this morning we read in the newspaper that President Buhari's in-law was kidnapped. But that's not true, it's on the national daily. And that brings us to the issue of ethics in this profession. Comrade, this is good. Ownership of media establishments, has also affected the practice of journalism in this country. Now, what have you got to say about the ethics and how your professional colleagues, practice journalism, both those in the conventional media and those in the, social media platforms?
Thank you very much. I know that we have our ethics clearly, but I want to respond a little bit to what Professor Pate said. Even though our brother there said there are historical issues, they are just there. But when you talk about media freedom, you see his term, media freedom, you must also talk about empowerment of the media practitioners themselves. If they are not effectively empowered, it's going to be difficult to discharge their responsibilities. That's the truth. And if you look at most of our colleagues, both in the conventional, the newspaper, of course, in the broadcast, you see that a whole lot of them are freelance journalists who, at the end of the day, earn nothing. Those who are even on regular engagement, what are they paid at the end of the day? Most of the people that are in the media, they don't enjoy any form of insurance cover. These are issues. And when somebody is not well equipped, you want him to engage in investigative kind of journalism? How is he going to do that? When he is asked to fend for himself, you get an appointment letter, the next thing is go take care of yourself. You don't have working tools, you don't have just anything. You are just there. Of course, you have armed him to engage in all form of unethical behaviors. And that is the truth. And that's why we at the NUJ, we are engaging, interfacing with media owners, especially those of the private establishments. That is important, not just in giving somebody employment. If you are going to take care of, if you have capacity for only 10 employees, make do with them. You don't need to engage 100 persons and you don't have capacity to take care of them. If you effectively equip only 10, I can tell you they are going to do that job creditably. And that's the truth. So now, it doesn't also take us away from the fact that we must at all times promote ethical standards. Ethics, very, very key. And we've made it very clear that whoever goes contrary to our ethics, there definitely will be consequences. But before you begin to do this, you must ensure that the people that are your members are well remunerated. In terms of welfare, they are okay. Today, you see a lot of media houses that are owing workers as much as 21 months arrears of salaries. 21 months! And yet, you want this person to remain the conscience of the society. You want him to be the voice for the voiceless. That's the truth. And even the salary that is supposed to pay it is so meager. It can't even take anybody home. And that's the truth. And that's why we are, of course, planning on coming up with a package, enhanced media package, salary package. Thank God, very soon we are going to have the 9th assembly and we'll have a good number of our people there.
So John, your predecessor came up with something concerning insurance for pressing journalists. How has that been?
Well, I can tell you that, yes, that was Mohammed Garba, who, of course, introduced the insurance program. It ran for a period of time. But I can say that it's not that strong. And we're trying to now reactivate it. In the past 3 years, I don't think it was there. So we're trying to reactivate it. Of course, look at the health insurance angle to it and also put it together. These are the things we are trying to, work out. Enhanced media salary package, paying salary as and when due. These are all issues. By the time you tackle them, they are not just historical. They are things that are staring us in the face every other day. Because the journalist, the fact that you're a journalist, you can't go to Wuse Market and say, I'm a journalist. They will just give you anything you want there. You still go to the same market with ordinary Nigerians. So you must be well taken. Your welfare should be of paramount importance to whoever that is.
Chris Isiguzo, when these issues often come up with regard to the parlous state of the personal economies of some journalists, certainly not all. I have difficulty in trying to locate where the problem is in public conversations. sometimes when colleagues speak, it's as though we are blaming the rest of society. At some point, we blame proprietors, and sometimes it's as if we are looking for government aid and government assistance. There are media organizations in this country that have been on for decades, and they pay their staff promptly.
How many are they?
Yeah, well, that's the question to ask. And those that are not there, why does the law of the market not wipe them off the streets? Professor Pate, yes.
You see, earlier when I was talking about press freedom, I mentioned something about safety of journalists. And what we mean by safety of journalists, there's economic safety, political safety, gender safety, digital safety, legal safety, and social safety. One, somebody who is not politically safe, or is not psychologically or physically safe. Somebody who is not psychologically safe will not even have the state of mind to be able to do his job well. Somebody who is not physically safe, having feelings of threats that after his investigative reporting, something will happen to him, or he has seen what has happened to his colleagues, he's not going to perform. And somebody who is not economically safe, number one, his remuneration is zero or not at all, or somebody whose living condition is so perilous and so poor, like somebody who is reporting on unemployment, and when you see him, he appears more unemployed than the unemployed person is reporting about. And all these conditions, somebody who is going to report without a vehicle, looking so wretched that will not even attract credibility of those that he's supposed to talk to, then somebody who is not digitally safe, whatever you report digitally, you are castigated online. Somebody who is not gender safe, ladies who go out as reporters are harassed, intimidated either by their bosses or by the news sources, then there is no way they could be in complete state of mind and feel like respected professionals to be able to engage in their own calling and report as effectively as they should. The whole world is concerned about these issues.
Yeah. Well, Professor Pate, thanks a lot. You've elaborated on the safety of journalists, but let's single out the economic safety aspect, which has to do with remuneration that the AUJ president was talking about, and which we are all familiar with. Yesterday was Labour Day, and we had the Labour leaders, who were here with us in the studios, plus another guest, Professor of Labour Law. The point is important. The story has been out there.
Yes,
Prof, just a minute. The story is out there of some Nigerian investors, who had tried to set up in a place like South Africa and then couldn't sustain the kind of practices that we have here. Why would you employ somebody, which is a contract, and at the end of the day, the terms of the contract are not fulfilled?
Kingsley,
where does your right lie? Why don't we, seek, unless and until maybe those proprietors get their assets sold off to pay the debts,
I
perhaps.
agree with you, Kingsley. On this program, on this platform, I've argued and describe in quotes rascality of employers of labor in the media sector. And none of us have so far gone to the Industrial Labor Court to try.
Absolutely.
And we need to start taking clear legal steps. If you do not have business operating as a media proprietor, it's not necessary you should be. But we have allowed them to continue misbehaving and maltreating our colleagues, thereby bastardizing the entire profession. And today we have so many masquerading as media persons, using all sorts of names, at the end of the day destroying the image of the country, destroying the image of personalities. But we need to take clear legal steps. If you cannot operate, and like MVC now is issuing licenses, there should be clearly defined criteria for employment and the protection of those who work in the sector. Like I've told you, today, the world is celebrating World Press Freedom today and tomorrow, and one of the major agenda is safety of journalists. There is a clear academic conference I've been attending for the past 4 or 5 years. I'm supposed to be in Ethiopia today, but for some reason I couldn't go. And upper week, we will be in Paris to talk on this subject, and the end of the month, we'll be holding the World News Congress in in Glasgow, and we are still going to discuss on this issue. And experiences are being shared from all over the world on this subject. So Nigeria need to take a very bold legal step on this subject. We cannot just continue lamenting and lamenting while we talk about what happened in other sectors. Our own sector is worse.
That's right. That would require class action. Those who are affected.
Gentlemen, let us not forget the fact that when we make reference only to the privately owned media organizations, we may be talking.
Not only private.
We may be wrong, because I recall the late Dora Akunyili fought so hard as Minister of Information to see how she can raise the bar for media practitioners in the federal government or even state-owned media organizations. They are all generally not properly remunerated if you compare Nigeria to other climes, including African countries. Now, Abike Dabere Erewa, where she was at the National Assembly, also put up a fight, that failed along the line. Right. So this does cuts across not just the private sector, but also the public sector. Now, let's bring in the issue of factors that influence media messages, apart from editorial values and judgment. In even government-owned organizations, we ask for people to pay for certain messages. Right. So what should influence media messages apart from editorial values? I'd like Madam Garba to come in here.
Well, from my own point of view, I think that the today's media globally is driven by money. Let's face it. I mean, we can't continue to pretend. There is national interest, there is a owner interest, and ideological reasons behind some of these things. But the tendency and the ground reality is that, media organizations that are set up to promote ideological causes, they don't do well. But those that are set up purely on the basis of market principles as a business, they are the ones that succeed, they last. So therefore, therefore, media content would strive to meet the needs, and I'm sorry to say this, but then those who pay, yes, there is a social responsibility, and we are operating within that framework. But the important thing is that there must be competition, and there must be diversity of the media, so that we are all throwing into the milieu, into the discussion as it happens. So that if there is a big national issue, there's nothing wrong in newspaper in Sokoto or radio in Sokoto or in Bayelsa promoting purely narrow interests of their own people and throw it to the center, so that there is a huge discussion, and as it is always said, that there is always a contest between the truth and falsehood. Hopefully, in all situations, the truth will prevail. And so therefore, I don't think that anybody should be offended or concerned that there's too much commercialism or narrow thinking, whether ethnical or religious. People should throw it in. But the truth will prevail in all situations and in all circumstances.
All right, Malam Garba Shehu, thanks a lot. Kieran asked the question about media messages and therefore, gatekeeping and the factors that should determine that. But I want to return to the issue of safety of journalists, Kieran, which Professor Umaru Pate talked about, one of which we've discussed extensively, and which has to do with economic safety. The other is physical or even psychological safety. And my question is going to the NUJ president. Let's take it even in the context of the theme for this year's World Press Freedom Day, journalism and elections in times of disinformation. We have seen instances in the course of coverage of electioneering, campaigns, the course of voting, and thereafter. Nigerian journalists have sometimes been assaulted by law enforcement officials. What is the recourse of a journalist who faces such an assault? They will seize your camera, they will, beat you up, and sometimes you have blood streaming down your face or some other part of your body. And at the end of the day, somebody issues an apology, and that is the end of the matter.
Not even, sorry, to add to that, not just during the electioneering, talking about even covering the president or covering ministers. You find security officials, molesting journalists, pushing you down, and as a matter of fact, it is with reckless abandon. It has been happening over time.
Well, thank you very much. I think I spoke on that much earlier. But we've also had instances where journalists are assaulted. You read about them, and by the time you get across to that journalist, say after 24 hours, he says nothing like that happened to me. During the election, in fact, during the supplementary election, one of the inconclusive elections, a journalist was clearly assaulted in a state. We read about it. We asked the council there to reach out to the young man, and of course they did. By the time they got across to us, they told us that the young man said he's okay.
He has been settled or something?
He was settled. No, let's drill down on this. Was it a question of settlement, or again, the journalist was under psychological threat that, look, if you pursue this matter, worse could happen?
Exactly.
Well, if he's under psychological threat, somehow, at least behind the scene, you should be able to talk to your leaders. Behind the scene. Yeah. Let it not be that it's a media thing.
That's true.
Then you should be able to address the psychological aspect of it. But when both in front of the camera and outside the camera, the person is not saying anything like that, what do you do? Now, we've also had instances where somebody was reportedly clamped into detention for about 2 years. Later on, of course, he was released, and they discovered that there was nothing. He dragged the particular agency to court, and he got 10 million naira from court. So it's not just about AUJ going to court. You must have to get the consent of the person you are talking about.
Exactly.
And when that person is not ready to deliver that consent to you, what do? You just go and say, we had Kirian was assaulted. The court will look at you as somebody that is his brain is touching. And so that is the issue. Oftentimes, it's like when you talk about the economic safety. Most of our people, journalists themselves, even when you want to say, okay, don't freelance, we want to phase it out and all that, they would like tell you, no, please don't go there. What will I be doing? It's better I am there, go out every day and eke out a living than just going home to stay. That also is a challenge. You are determined to fight for him. But he's not ready for that. He will be like, if they reduce their workforce now, where will I be? There's no job anywhere. That also is a major challenge in our hands. That's the truth. So it's not just about having a recourse to law, the courts and all that. We are ready. Of course, one media establishment, a television station, one of their workers had to drag them to court. As we speak, they're in court. They put us there, because they've not received their salary for 20-something months. And they felt that this is wrong. And they went to court. We've not stopped them. So let's see what comes out of it. Maybe by the time the court goes through that and delivers judgment, it's going to be a guide to the rest of us. And we can now see it as a reference point. Other people who are probably dying in silence will now leverage on that and say, okay, if these people could get this, then let's go ahead with it.
All right, NGO President, thank you very much. Back again to Professor Umaru Pate. Again, media for democracy, elections alone do not constitute democracy. I mean, once you pass the election period, there's the issue of governance. But elections are very critical, and disinformation. What is your take on the Nigerian phenomenon where you are having a lot of talking heads now appearing on the broadcast media in the course of electioneering, and you have all kinds of conflicting information? You call it fake news, you call it manufacturing of consent, and so on and so forth. And the media itself doesn't even show any much restraint in terms of gatekeeping.
Well, the media in content and in performance reflect the attitude of the Nigerian elites, who are the leaders in the nation. You see, in every country there are 4 or 5 categories of elites. The intellectual elite, which the media is part of. The political elite, the military elite, the business elite, and the bureaucratic elite. Now, what is the behavior of the typical Nigerian political elite, who is supposed to give direction to the rest, to the other groups? Contradiction, desperation, greediness, primitive accumulation of capital, and how are these things manifested in their behaviors that are reflected in the content of the media? And many of them own the media, by the way. And even where they do not own, they control it directly or indirectly because they're in governance. So these desperations and other misbehavior that they manifest are reflected in our media and in our corporate world. Therefore, sometimes you need to understand this for you to have a correct understanding of the behavior of the Nigerian media. And look at the quality of elections we hold in this country. The killings. Who does the killings? Who does the rigging? Who does the manipulations? Who causes confusion for INEC? The politicians. And deliberately, they cause confusion in this system. And the media naturally will report it. Elections any day, anywhere is big news. So you have it, and they end up confusing our people and causing more confusion by using the various fault lines we have in this country. And they do not, at the end of the day, show any remorse. And at the end of the day, they are the greatest beneficiaries of the system.
Yes. Gentlemen, in fact, from this conversation, it is simply realistic that we have a very serious issue on our hands, as a nation, with respect to journalism practice and, of course, politics and what have you. Let's return to our man here, Garba Shehu. Now, what may serve as your closing remarks? Now, you alluded to the fact, that the extent of bad journalism in Nigeria has gotten to a crescendo. And of course, there's no responsible government that will sit back and be looking at people dwelling on fake news, people losing their lives because of fake news, unverified news, and what have you. What, in your opinion, should be done to see how we can remedy the situation, at least to curtail to a reasonable extent the level of fake news being transmitted across Nigeria on not just hourly basis, on minute by minute. As we speak now, there are several thousands of messages being sent across to individuals, organizations, and what have you. How can this be addressed?
There are so many ways, but quickly to say that one, I think that the media, mainstream media, ought to raise their own act. They ought to build credibility for themselves, believability. Without this, they're just as good as the online media that they seek to challenge. And I think that the media practitioners also need to improve themselves. A lot of these concerns about lack of pay and all of that, you know that there are also a lot of creative journalists we have in the country because of the education that they have. You can write, you can serve beyond one master because you can contribute articles, journals, you can that are abroad, and you get handled somewhere paid. And you see a number of journalists going abroad for vacations because they are earning money outside the country beyond salary that is not even being paid here because they have built quality in their own work and they're able to do it. But above everything else, I think that the media houses in the country ought to pretend more to be credible and above partisan fray. We're just coming out of a major election now. As it is now, some media houses are still in that election mode. And from their attitude and the way they do things, it's very, very clear that they are bitter about outcomes. And probably it isn't that political parties alone were defeated. So media houses are actually feeling they have been defeated because their outcomes that they expected, and those outcomes are not as they have them. And so therefore they continue to perpetuate electoral pre-election antics, even when an election is settled, is won and lost.
All right, Mola Garba Shehu, thank you very much. Professor Omaro Pate, very briefly on this, World Press Freedom Day and the kind of deleterious practices that we have in Nigeria, and the invitation for the law to sometimes take its course when a need arises. What, in your opinion, needs to be done? Because some of these practitioners in the social media who are referred to as news aggregators are just thriving on intellectual property theft.
And it's part of the corruption we're talking about. All these things are aspects of the corruption in the country, even what you see in the media. So tackling corruption is number one, and then improving the funding model of media organizations. Another, fighting for more ethical worth in the media system and equipping them well for them to be able to respond to the challenges posed by the social media so that people can believe in them. And the kind of control you see on broadcast media organizations at the state level need to be challenged continuously.
Okay, so we'll stop you there. Chris Isiguzo, just a few seconds, right? There's this UNESCO Guillermo Keno Freedom Prize, which was named after a Russian journalist that was murdered in 1986. Who is getting that prize this time around?
Well, I don't immediately have the name, at the moment, but I know that somebody is getting the award, the prize actually, okay. by tomorrow.
Tomorrow evening.
Tomorrow evening. I don't just have his name offhand.
All right. Gentlemen, it's here that we concluded this conversation. And first of all, we'd like to appreciate all of you for sharing your time with us this morning. First, Malam Garba Shehu, Senior Special Assistant to the President on Media and Publicity. It's always a pleasure to have you here, sir.
Thank you very much.
Professor Omar Pate, Dean Faculty of Communications, Bayero University. Former, yeah. Yes, you've been very, very interesting this morning, from your own perspectives of this conversation. And again, Comrade Chris Isiguzo, the #1 journalist in Nigeria, of course, is the president of NUJ. Thank you also for being here.
Thank you very much.
All right, Sport is next.